Wagwan! Good morning, good evening, and good night. Well, we learned how to structure our story to have a beginning, middle, and end. We learned how to write our protagonist. We learned how to write our antagonists. We learned how to build a world for them to live in. And so finally, we have to put it all together and make that book. So in this episode, I'm going to teach you the basics of how to put your book together, how to publish it, and a few tips on how to sell yourself. All right, let's go. You've probably written your story in a textbook. However, if you want it to be something that can be published, you're going to need to transcribe it into a digital form. In order to do that, you're going to need your computer. Now, there are a lot of software that can be used, but I want to make sure that you have some of the cheapest options that are out there. Me personally, I like to use Microsoft Word. Microsoft Word is super common. Most people know how to use it from high school. Most people are very familiar with that software. However, really anything that can transcribe script is perfectly fine. You can use Google Docs. You can use Notepad. You can use your cell phone if your cell phone has writing apps. Honestly, you could probably use your email if you just need to transcribe that text. However, you won't necessarily have that grammatical correcting software that usually is included in these types of software. You can get a copy of Microsoft Word with Microsoft Publisher included for about $6 a month. Now, when you're writing your story, you typically want to have it in a very legible font. Usually, depending on what you're writing, if you're writing a traditional novel, then you may want to choose a font like Garamond. Garamond is super legible. It's very commonly used, and so it can be read very easily. Also, you want to make sure that your font size is more traditional as well. And 12 is the more common font size that is used in the industry. However, if you're writing for, say, a children's book, you may want to use a font like Comic Sans. I know some people may think that Comic Sans really isn't an appropriate font for a book. However, when it comes to children's books and obviously comics, Comic Sans is the best font that you can use. It's super legible, children like it and find it easy to read, and parents, when they're reading it to their children, like the ease that the font has. When writing for children, however, you want to know the size of the book that you're going to create beforehand so that you can plan ahead the font size. You generally want a larger font size because, again, this is for children and for the parents reading to those children. You want to make sure that the letters are spaced out a bit more than you would a traditional novel. Because again, you're thinking of the parent when they're reading to their children. And the parent is usually looking at each individual word with their finger. And if the font is too small, then their big finger is likely to cover up a lot of words, causing quite a bit of frustration on their part. As much as a children's book sounds like it's for children, it really is for the parent who is reading to their children. And so you want to keep that in mind when designing your book. When writing your manuscript as well, you want to make sure that your margins are an inch in on both sides. And you want to make sure that your header and footer is left blank. Your footer, however, should have your page number. This allows any reader who is reading your manuscript to be able to easily find a location in your manuscript by the number. After you've finished writing your manuscript, you then want to save it as a PDF file, because PDF prevents anyone from editing the manuscript that you wrote. It's quite convenient. So after you've written your manuscript, the next step that you're going to want to consider is the artwork for your book. Now, if you're going to create art, you're going to need an artist. And if you're not the artist, then you're going to want to hire one. Now, there are many ways, obviously, to hire an artist. You may know artists that you can hire off the bat. However, if you're not that lucky to know a wonderful artist, then the next step you can do is going online. And there are many websites that you can go to hire an artist. You can go manually through websites like DeviantArt. You can go on websites like Upwork, who have artists who have professional rates. However, if you're not able to quite afford an artist, or if you'd like to maybe tinker around and try and figure out the art style that you're looking for, a cheaper alternative would be Fiverr.com, where you can pick usually an artist to maybe do some sketches for you for a more affordable rate. When picking an artist for your book, you really want to hire an artist who has experience with illustrating books. It may not seem like much. After all, you may be thinking, well, an artist is an artist, but you definitely want an artist who knows the difference between Roy G. Biv and YCMK. If those didn't make any sense to you, but it'll likely make sense to an artist, and if they know the difference, then that's the artist that you want to hire. When creating your art, you want to consider if you're making it exclusively for digital consumption, or if you're going to be making a physical book. If you're going to make a physical book, there are some steps that your artists need to know. If you're going to be printing your book, you're going to want to have it in CMYK. CMYK is the format that is used for primarily printing. It just stands for cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, or key. If you don't consider this and you end up sending the book in Roy G. Biv, then don't be surprised when it's printed that the book doesn't quite look like how you intended. When printing books, there are standards that must be met in order to have the best book possible. For example, you also want to make sure that your books are 300 DPI. That is the resolution that you're using for your books. In terms of the size of the books, it doesn't quite matter because every book has a different size. I personally, for children's books, like to use 8.5 inches by 8.5 inches. However, your book can be literally any size that you want if you can afford it. You'll very quickly realize that a lot of the decisions that you end up making for your books will generally come down to cost. If you want soft cover versus hardcover, that's gonna cost you. If you want glued binding or stitched binding, that is going to cost. The type of paper that you choose to use, is it going to be matte or is it going to be glossy? Depending on the type of presentation that you want to bring across, and again, what you can afford, you're going to have to make these decisions on your own. When illustrating the art for your book, you also want to consider the bleed space, because when the printer cuts your book, they're going to cut pieces of the illustration itself. It just can't be helped. And so, when you're doing your illustrations and when your artist is doing their illustration, you want to make sure that you don't have them cutting off pieces of vital information in that illustration. And so you'll notice that most printers will ask you to leave at least a half an inch of space on either side of that is just blank. When your artist is also illustrating your book, you want to consider space for your letters, because you don't want your artist to create the most fantastical art, and yet because they didn't consider the letters, you end up having to erase a lot of their illustrations or format it in a way that they, the artist, or you, the artist, didn't intend. That can be super frustrating. You also want to consider the fact that the colors used may or may not be complementary to the text. If they decide to use very dark colors, a black font may not appear very well against a dark background. And so it may become difficult for your reader to see the letters. All these things are things that you're going to have to consider when creating your book. Some software that you can use for illustration are, my favorite personally is Photoshop. However, you can use Adobe Illustrator. There's also GIMP if you're looking for free software, as well as ZBrush. All of these are convenient software and freeware that you can use when creating your illustration. The wonderful thing about these software as well is that when you're ready, you're going to want to save it. Again, remember, 300 DPI and in PNG. When you save your file in PNG, even though the file may be bigger, it allows you for higher quality and for you to expand and contract the image without losing quality. That is something that you don't get with JPEG. Next, you're going to want to use a software that can compile your artwork and your manuscript together. A fine example of a software that can do that is Microsoft Publisher, though there are also many different types of software that you can use. When you're opening up your Publisher file, you're going to want to make sure that the size of the file is going to coincide with the size of the book. Now, you've determined that, say for example, you want your book to be 8.5 inches, then remember that you want to include the bleed space as well. So you're more than likely going to make it, say, 8.75 or even 9 inches to factor in for any cutoff or any other bleed that you may have to factor in. When you create your Publisher file, you also want to have two different files for your book. One will be the inside of your book. Those are the pages that will be present on the inside of the book. And then the other file will be your cover file. This will be the art for the front and the back of your book. If your book is a novel and has a lot of pages, then you also want to include space for that center spine of the book. So for example, if you think that your book is, again, 8.5 inches, you're going to want to include the 8.5 inches for the front of the book, plus 8.5 inches for the back of the book, plus 0.25 inches for the bleed space, plus 0.5 inches for the spine. So all that added up together will be 17.75 inches for the length of your cover. If you look at my book, Julie's Puppies, as an example, you can see that I have a lot of space left for my bleed, as well as space for my font and my lettering. in the illustration. Another thing you're going to want to think about when creating your book is to have the pages divisible by 4. This makes it easier for the printing company because of how they compile their books together. That can usually increase or decrease costs depending on what it is that you plan to have there. I divide my book in a manner that takes into consideration the inseams of the book. You want to usually leave approximately 1/2 inch to 1 inch of that space free, because remember, when you're opening up a book, the insides can be swallowed up by font. So, for example, here, as you can see, I leave a little space open from the edges so that when you open the book, it doesn't get swallowed up by the creases. So my book, ABCs of the Virgin Islands, is 28 pages because that's divisible by 4. While you don't have to use a number divisible by 4, be aware that if you don't, you're going to end up with a few blank pages in your book. Now, when designing your cover, you want to make sure that you have a cover that will grab your audience's attention. So if you're using children's books, you want something that is bright and colorful and will attract the attention of a child. If you're looking for murder mystery, then you may want to use darker colors and more brooding, mysterious looking artwork. The same with fantasy. If you're doing fantasy, you want to make sure that the illustrations that you use reflect the genre that you're going to be writing in. In the back of your book, you want to include a paragraph or at least a sentence or two that describes your book. You may want to consider also a review of that book. A review by a noted person or just somewhere that is recorded. It is here also in the back of your book that you want to include what is called an ISBN and a barcode. Now, an ISBN is an International Standard Book Number. What that means is when you publish your book, that number can be used by libraries all across the world to know the basics about your book. Now, getting an ISBN is super easy. All you have to do is go on their website, isbn.org, and pay for an ISBN. It usually costs approximately $125 for an ISBN and then $25 for a barcode. In your barcode, you'll notice that you can set your price. Now, I can't really tell you what price to set your book at. You would have to do your marketing research and see what people are willing to pay for your book. However, once you've determined that, you can then include that price inside your barcode. Now, I will warn you, if you plan on putting your book in a bookstore, some bookstores prefer you not have a barcode already set, and then they'll choose to their own barcode over that already placed barcode. However, if you do plan on selling your book to other venues, maybe other supermarkets or a pharmacy or wherever that may want to have your book, having the barcode there does make things easier. Just realize that you may have to change the barcode based on the agreement that you have with the bookstore that you decide to sell with. Just realize that you may have to change the barcode based on the agreement that you have with the bookstore that you decide to sell with. I highly recommend that you get an ISBN and a barcode for your book, however. It makes you much more professional and it makes it much easier for libraries to find your book. I highly recommend that you get an ISBN and a barcode for your book, however. It makes you much more professional, and it makes it much easier for libraries to find your book. So once you have your ISBN, you can then include it in your publisher file, and you can determine where you want to place it on the back of your book. The main thing that matters is that the barcode and ISBN are a high enough resolution that when it's printed, it is clearly legible and scannable. Once you've compiled that all together, then you can save your file as a PDF. That is the most common format that printing companies generally ask you to save as when sending them a book. After you've compiled your book together, the next thing that you'll want to do, obviously, is send it to the printing company. Now, I can't tell you which company is best or which isn't. You can do your own research to see the company that you're comfortable with. The one advice that I can give you is, when picking your company, like with any company, be with one that you feel comfortable with and that you can talk to and negotiate with. I personally, for my books, used a company named Bookmasters, who were established in Ashland, Ohio. However, again, depending on your needs, you may want to use a different book printing company. Now, on the inside of your book, if you can see it properly, you may notice that a lot of books have all this information. You want to have that copyright information there. Then you want to have your ISBN, and it's good to include the printing company that you used, their address, and any dedications that you want for your book. In my case, I dedicated the book to the Virgin Islands, but also I gave special thanks to my researcher and to my artist. Then I included company and business information. All of this adds to the professionalism of your book. Now, some of you may be able to hire an editor who would do all of this for you, but with this information, I can guarantee you'll do it yourself. It won't cost you any extra, and it will look just as professional. Once you've saved your book and you've sent it off to your printery, again, you can negotiate the price that you want with the printing company by determine if you want to have a hardcover book or a softcover book, if you want glossy pages, or if you want it in color or black and white. All of these things determine the price that you'll eventually have to pay for your book. Once you've done that, it usually takes a few weeks to a few months to print your books. From there, once you have your physical book, it's up to you to do the marketing. Having a book is only the beginning of your journey, especially if you want to get into sales. I would recommend going to your local bookstore or any store that sells books. Talk with the manager, show them your book. Be very friendly, obviously. You don't want to be a jerk to these people who would eventually be making you money, right? Most companies are looking for new content to showcase to customers, so they'll likely be more than happy to see your book and be willing to sell it for you. When selling your book to these stores, you want to determine if your book will be what is called on consignment. Now, consignment is when the bookstore may determine to sell the book for you. However, they will get a cut of whatever it is however amount that they sell. However, if they don't sell any copies, then they don't make any money, and obviously you don't make any money. So you can choose to say have it on consignment, and some companies will do a split of, say, 60-40, where you receive 60% of the net value of the book and they will receive 40%. What this does is it takes off the pressure from the bookstore to have to sell those books. Some bookstores, or some people, depending on your negotiating skills, are willing to buy the book outright from you. Usually, if a company decides to buy the book from you, they may determine to either split it 50-50, or depending on the size of the store, they may split it 70-30, where you receive 30% of the sales and they'll receive 70%. However, in cases like that, companies tend to buy a very large volume of your books in one sitting, and they pay you outright. So it can be very profitable for you to do that. When setting the price of your books, a little business 101. You want to set the price of the book at about 5 to 10 times the cost of the book. So for example, if each book costs $1 to print, you want to sell that book for at least $5 or $10. Again, your market will determine these things, but that is a good point to start off from. That way, even if you decide to sell the book at 70-30, you are still making $3 and it only costed you $1 to make. So that's good business sense. If, however, you don't want to have physical copies of your book, but instead you just want to have an electric version or an ebook, you can easily do that by creating just the PDF file. You can then sell it to individual people as you choose, or you can use a merchant platform such as Amazon. Amazon, however, if you do decide to use them, want you to save your files as an EPUB file. Now, not all software has the ability to save as an EPUB, so you may want to check to see if the software has the ability to do so, or you can go to Fiverr.com and pay someone to convert it for you. It's not that big a deal. If you decide to sell online, then some advice that I can give to you. Start a Facebook page. Create a fan base based on that Facebook page and build. You can use social media to garner up interest in your books. Next, you want to create a website. There are a lot of free website creating outlets out there. For example, Wix.com or Squarespace.com. These two websites make it super easy to create a website. Unfortunately, they're not sponsors, but I have to admit, their platform is super incredible. If there's a local radio station that you can visit, or a podcast, you can go to them, ask them nicely if you can talk about your book on their platform. Many people, if you're nice to them, are more than willing to help you, especially if you're a new and budding writer. Don't be afraid to ask people for help. Now remember, you don't have to take my word for it. There are many books on self-publishing that you can use in order to do exactly what I just told you to do. All I can do is give you my perspective. There's How to Self-Publish Your Book by Carla King, and The Essential Guide to Getting Your Book Published by David Henry, as well as Hello Future Me. You can also get my books by emailing me at projectamedia at outlook.com. That's Project A Media at outlook.com. And I'll be more than happy to get you a copy of my book signed and sealed. So, we learned how to write our story from beginning to end. We learned about protagonists and we learned about antagonists. We learned about galaxies and worlds, and we learned how to put it all together in a book. Well, as I said, dude, it's not that hard. Go out there and make something great. I believe in you. Now, all good things must come to an end. That's just a part of life. And while it may make us sad sometimes to know that the good times have gone just for a little bit, we know that there's so many more opportunities out there for us. And so I have one wish for you to go out there, grab those opportunities, and soar. Because I believe in you. I believe that you can do anything you set your mind to. You'd be surprised the power that you have. But I've been telling you that for the last month. It's up to you now to take that knowledge and to soar. I look so forward to seeing what you create. Because, dude, it's not that hard. I believe in you, and I'll see you in the next episode, whenever that may be.